So, namaskara and welcome back to another episode of Awakening Indian Design. The visuals are there if they are ending. This episode is the start of a new series called Getting School. I'm cool on various topics from various experts. So, we have one such expert today, Diana Albarran Gonzalez. Diana is a native Latin American design researcher from Mexico, currently living in Aotearoa in New Zealand. She recently graduated from the Maori and Indigenous faculty at Auckland University of Technology, where her thesis focused on the decolonization of design in collaboration with Mayan weavers from Chiapas, Mexico, her place of origin. She has developed a Buen Vivir-centric design model towards a fair, dignified life based on collective well-being, textiles, crafts, design arts, and creativity. She is also a representative of Design for Change in New Zealand, a global movement that teaches children a basic design thinking process towards social change. Diana has more than 15 years of experience in New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, Spain, and Mexico, applying, relearning, and teaching design processes and tools. This has given her the ability to address challenges in a variety of contexts and the opportunity to develop meaningful sense of culture and diversity awareness and sensitivity. She's a creativist and active member of the Latin American community, seeking to contribute to women's and families' well-being over their through connections to her own cultural roots. So Diana, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for the invitation and for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, could you share some details of your design education journey and run up to your topic of decolonizing design?
Okay. So I study a bachelor in industrial design in Mexico, and I started in 1999. Now that sounds so long ago. And then from there, then I worked as an industrial designer, product designer for a while, and then I went to Spain and I did a master's there in design management and new products development. And I work as a design lecturer for a while in Mexico after Spain, like since 2008. So I've been teaching design and creativity and these topics until in 2011, I moved to Singapore. Mm-hmm. Because of family plans and stuff. My daughter was very young. She was born the same year, actually. And then, so in Singapore, I did a few projects there, more as a freelancer, independent consultant and stuff. And in collaboration, like let's say we design studio in collaboration with friends from Mexico, designers from Mexico. And then I came, but the PhD was something that it was always in back of my head. And then I came to Aotearoa to New Zealand, and I found like the university that I actually started teaching first in Auckland University of Technology. I started teaching design and a design major for the Bachelor in Business. Actually, it was very different, and it was aligned to my master's. But then, so I started actually, my first approach was in social design and crafts. Let's say if we put it like ethical consumption, if we put like in very broad terms. But then doing the research and starting, like textile has been part of my heritage and my history since I was born, from birth. You know, like Mexico has a lot of richness in textiles that it's very unique and diverse in different regions and stuff. So that's something that has always been part of, let's say, my identity. I inherit the love of textiles from my mother. And she'd been always wearing huipiles and stuff in a time when they was not trendy. Like now it's becoming more common, but then at that time it wasn't not as common. And then so when I started analyzing or approaching textile or craft, let's say, and even the term craft, and I quote unquote, because like we learned this distinction and very broad hierarchy between, in Spanish we call it artesanía, craft. In English, there's no translation. There's no distinction between manualidad y artesanía, but for us there is, like the cultural aspect in artesanía, it's very important. And then we have design, and then we have art, you know, like as a main thing. But for that approach is very imposed as a very Western approach into art, design, and craft that imposes and put our, like, even they call folk art, like anything that is not sometimes and many times not European, it's put in the folk art. And start questioning, like,
if I can ask a question. You mentioned about the hierarchy, right? The craft, art, and the design. Was it there previously before colonization, or did it happen after colonization?
Like in, let's say, artists or people, well, I'll talk about particularly like Mayan perspective, but being writing, because the writing system in Mayan, it has a lot of symbols. So the distinction between being a scholar and an artist, it wasn't clear as it is now.
Okay.
And weavers were very respected in a very high, let's say, hierarchy within the social structures, and that was also Aztec and Mesoamerican culture. So those distinctions came later. So at the end, now we operate on the distinction of art, design, and craft, which is, I think it's very problematic, because especially recognizes as, if you're let's say non-white or non-European, it put anything of art creation from Native Americans or from people from other countries as a folk art or as a craft, but not at the same level as art. So at the end, there's hierarchies that start happening and clashing with each other. So I think that that's something that we need to really start rethinking, because even for me, I learned embroidery by my mom and my aunties, like my dad's sisters, and textile work and all of this stuff that has always kind of, or perceived as being as a soft skill for women, you know, like something you do in your house, and it's been even kind of oppression thing. But then now in Latin America, there's a huge movement on reclaiming these practices and even using a lot as activism and using textiles in order to talk about hard issues, you know. So the knowledge that comes with textiles goes beyond only, like, now labeled as fashion, but there's a lot of meaning in textiles, and not only the patterns, but the techniques and the beliefs and the systems of, even, like, I can't imagine, or how many people can imagine to create a garment, like everything, just by backstrap loom weaving, that is something like this, you know, like a few sticks and threads.
Yeah.
So that's technology, but we see that as something that is kind of become, like a folklore, but it goes beyond that. And I think we really need to shift that mindset. And that's what also shift my thinking into decolonial. When I found out about decolonial theory, I thought it was very good, because social design sometimes it approaches from it could be very paternalistic, you know, like, poor people in developing countries, they don't know what to do, so let's go and help them. But the issues about power, access, privilege, politics are not addressed in social design sometimes. And I think there's key things to address if you are coming in a position of privilege and power towards working with vulnerable communities. So that's why a decolonial theory really help a lot, and also very context-based, you know, like there are amazing scholars from Latin America writing about these topics for decades. So I thought it became a natural turn, even though I was here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Fantastic. So I'll come to the question, what is decolonizing design?
Okay, I will share my screen now, so I can show you a few stuff. Well, I am kind of against like single definitions.
Yeah.
Because it depends on where the context and who is doing the power relationships across. So I wouldn't dare to define as a single thing, but I can give you my view and my experience.
Yeah.
So for me, decolonizing design, it's understanding that the design, at least, is very linked to design education. So the design as we know, let's say, or the design that we learn in schools, like you mentioned in your podcast, the Bauhaus and all of that, is it's Western centric. So it's Eurocentric, Anglo-Eurocentric, you know, like, so we learn about these European trends on design.
Right.
But and what about the others? You know, like this, for me, one of the first steps and the things that I was trying to do with my students is just to acknowledge, when I was teaching design history, is just, we will talk about Western design history and European design history, and make sure that, because Auckland is one of the most diverse cities in the world, so just letting students know from other countries, like, you know, like, we have our own design histories,
Right,
that are different. So for me, that one of the steps that I could do while being in the classroom. So it's just acknowledging, like, what we talk about, a single design is actually, it's very narrow-minded, and it's just one vision of the world, which is so different from each context. So for me, that's one of the main things, just acknowledging and understanding that design exists. And as a colleague from Colombia, a good friend, Alfredo Gutierrez Borrero, he talks about diseño con otros nombres, or designs with other names, or designs, or others talking about design from the South. So design where we have different approaches, because there's a disconnection when we are educated with this view, even in Mexico, of arts and crafts movement, you know, like from the UK, and then when you look around us and it's still alive. It's different. Right. It's very different. So, but it's like we don't make the connection between what is in our context within what we're studying in university. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that we have different ways of designing, because if we learn, and many times, one of the, I think, also problematic things that I see in Mexico and other Latin American countries is that because we are educated this way, and there's a strong disconnection with the context from the South that we work and live in. We are originated from the South, like the global South. And then we're working with in communities in the global South, but with knowledge from the global North. So there's a strong disconnection. And sometimes in practice, when you start working with communities, you realize, like, things actually don't fit sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that I wanted to ask was, you mentioned the way of designing. So you mean to say the design process should also be decolonized?
And again, whose design process? Because it depends who you reference to. Because is it one design process, or people develop their own design processes, and different cultures have their own design processes. So I think, because if we talk about design, it's link of ways of being and doing. So even the term process, it's very a Western thing to you know, like, to breaking into these different steps, as you know, like it's being told of design process, like how many steps, depending which school, you will have 4, 5, 6 or more. So I kind of resist that to really fit into that definition. But I think because it's the ontologies of design, ways of being design, ways of doing design. So at the end, things are hand to hand. If you talk about decolonizing design, the process, it's embedded in that. How do you do design? It's embedded in that.
Right, right. So one thing that I actually wanted to mention was in India right now, they are building new structures for the temples. So it's completely new temple architecture for the religion, which is Hinduism, and culturally it's Sanatana Dharma per se. And what has happened is that right now the whole new architecture the architects have implemented the the Bauhaus principles in temple architecture. And it's, and I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm really enraged. And for the fact is that we are not in a position, because India has, received its independence 7 decades ago, and you can say it's a fairly new country, but we are still trying to grasp our cultural heritage, our cultural values, traditions, practices. There's so much of knowledge which has been lost because of invasions and colonizations, and now it's like they're trying to bring everything from the West and implementing it into a temple. Temple is supposed to be like the epitome of the cultural values and heritage, right? And they're trying to secularize that religious place, which is not acceptable at all. So in my way, I felt that is actually colonization. And even though the architects are Indians, and it's not done by outsiders, which is fascinating. And also I'm a little enraged, as I mentioned, but yeah, this is where we are right now.
Yeah, it's very complex, because when we talk about coloniality, decolonize or decoloniality, like there's many scholars like Aníbal Quijano and Maldonado Torres that they talk about the coloniality of the being, and
Right.
then an African, I forgot his name, sorry, but the coloniality of the mind, that decolonizing the mind, like the let's say colonization and the coloniality is manifested within ourselves as well. And we can, of course, we can reference the work of Frantz Fanon, and like all of them, like they were talking about the consequences of, because we've been raised from a Western point of view, and we try to reproduce the let's say the colonial, or because we are taught that the idea way of the superior way of doing stuff, it's always somewhere else.
Right.
Instead of looking back and rescuing the knowledge that we already have. But it's funny because a lot of people talk about future and be modern, like even modernity, it's a short period in time. And we forget that before that, there's like history in each context for centuries. But it's like, we can't imagine, we forgot, and we can't imagine that that's another way. It's like, oh, in order to be modern, you have to be this way, and that's it.
Yeah, you have to be inside the box.
Yeah, and that's why when I think, when I hear about indigenous futurism and all of that, it's like, yes, other ways of imagining futures, and people believe that it's like, oh, it's going backwards, like, oh, you can't leave, like the past is already gone, but the knowledges are still there. Why can't we? It's not that we can go back in time and live like in that time, but we can use the learnings and rescue the learnings that were still present, and then move into the future. So that's a different perspective. Like,
I think you mentioned in your thesis that you have to look back to the past to move forward into the future.
Yeah, like in indigenous worldviews, not only me, like here in like Maori Pacifica cultures, and I think Native Americans as well, in the US and Canada, First Nations, they talk about that that actually the past is not in our back, is in front of us, because it already passed. We can see what's there, and the future is in our back because we don't see what's coming. We don't know yet what's coming.
Right.
So, and even in terms of time, like in Mayan calendar and stuff, like the terms of time were cyclical. So sometimes it's not that it's linear thing, that linear way of thinking of time as well. And it's a Western way of perceiving time and space, because the spiral, it's present in many indigenous worldviews.
Absolutely. And coming back to the decolonizing design and its discourse in academics. So should this be made as a compulsory discipline in the educational institutions like design schools?
Yeah, I'm not fond of compulsory anything, but there should be a lot of discussions and reform, definitely, that are way more context-based. Like, for example, I like here, and even here in Aotearoa, Like there's not many places that you can actually learn from Maori designers. You know, like there's great initiatives like Naho Maori Design, and there's this like groups of professionals that are designing like the Te Aranga principles that are based on Maori ways of being and doing. But it's not something that is actually so available out there in education. So and comparing to other contexts, like for example, Latin America, we are very, the coloniality of the being is so present still that it happens the same as that's happening in India, as you said. Instead of looking back, and I can't imagine like the temples. I haven't been in India yet, that I would love to go, but I can imagine the knowledge that comes in architecture, like our ruins, you know, like
Yeah.
they were so perfectly built, aligned with the equinox, the sun, everything. So there's so much knowledge that goes, it's so rich that just losing that and reproducing something that is out of a context.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a shame. And also about India, what I wanted to, I've been thinking, like, since you contacted me the first time and I was listening to your podcast, it's like, yeah, I told you I haven't been there, but if the other things that I know are based on my friends as well from different parts of India, is just, and that happened in Mexico as well, to be careful about the, let's say, nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about, again, the discussion about what's Mexican design, and it's a never-ending story. And because one thing is the national identity,
Yeah.
the politics, and another thing is the rich diversity of each region. So in India, that would be like Punjab or Bengal. What Bengal design would look like, what Punjab design would look like, you know, like, and it's not what looks like, because it's already there. It's just we need to frame it and see it in a different lens. And even because of colonization in India, like Pakistan, you know, and Bangladesh, like the whole, there wasn't any distinction about as a region, and cultural regions were divided very different into the geopolitics of the present.
Right.
So, you know, like, why can't we just look back? Not because we want to go back in time, but because we can learn from the things that we were doing right before.
Yeah. So the thing that I felt was the fact is that there's so much knowledge that we have unfortunately lost through the ages. So much misrepresentation of that civilization, misinformation, misreproduction of the knowledge that existed. So right now we are dealing with a lot of fake news. We don't know what is real or what is booga booga. So that's kind of a situation where, okay, what are we going to do next, and how are we going to have values? Where are we going to get the values from? Are we going to take everything from the West? And to be honest, India, there are a lot of other people out there in India who are more Western than the people from the West in their attitudes and their behavior. And for me, it's I mean, there's no problem with that per se, but the fact is that we have to know who we were in the past, to really know, to base ourselves to to make decisions so that we don't repeat the same in the future.
Yeah, like for example, you asked me about in one of your questions, you were talking about identity, I think.
Right.
And for example, that's really related to coloniality, at least from my context again. We were born, or we were raised, at least since I think around 1920s, mid-20s, 30s, because of the education policy change, and it was about talk about the cosmic race, or la raza cósmica, as a new race, you know, like, and then we are called mestizos. That, Mexicans, mestizos, identify mostly as mestizos, which is the mix of indigenous with Spanish. And I grew up like that. I learned that all my life, and I had no problem with that. I knew that, and in a way, it's like, yes, I know that I have indigenous blood, but from where? And all of that is just there. And a lot of like mixed identity or mixed race, like as the mestizo, is always looking towards Europe and Spain. Like, so you would say like, oh yeah, I'm this, but my grandfather was Spanish, or but like the but, and then there's no incentive to know our indigenous ancestry. So this space of in between is that you can't root properly within your own land because you don't know exactly, and also it's a lot of, and I understand because you don't want to, like, current indigenous communities are very marginalized, and you don't want to take a space that doesn't, like you haven't, and I acknowledge that being a mestizo in Mexico actually comes with a privilege, rather than being from an indigenous community. So just claiming the indigeneity in my context, that will take sometimes as a very problematic space, because I didn't suffer from the oppression of being marginalized as a indigenous person from pueblos originarios currently. So we need to be aware of our positionalities. Like, it's not the same when I talk about this research outside Aotearoa or in Aotearoa, rather than when I'm in Mexico, you know, like, because our stories are very important. So that thing of, as you said, like, there are more Western people in India, like in Latin America is the same. It's very similar. And even in Mexico now, the term whitexican, that they believe that they are more white, like, so it's, and even the term mestizo, first it was imposed, and second, it's it really erased the histories or the diversity of the nation as a foundation, because there are Afro-Mexicans, like Afro-descent communities that been there like for centuries, of course, and only in 2015 they were acknowledged in the census as Afro-Mexicans. So their contributions in music, in food, in many stuff are very present, but they have never been named. Because of course slavery, because being Afro-descendant means you became as a slave. So no one wants to identify that. And also there's been migration into the country for centuries. Like, my great-grandfather was Japanese and he arrived into Mexico. So I have that as well. So, like, I think trying to unify or to have this homogeneous image of a Mexican, at least, it's assimilating a lot of communities that are erasing their own histories. And I think, why can we acknowledge all our origins without having this? But I know, like, as you said, it's talking about decolonization, it's very always related into power and privilege, therefore in politics.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people are very scared even of the term, because like, oh no, I want to, and I know a lot of people's like, I don't care about politics. It's like, normally the people who are in privilege say that, because the people who are suffering from or marginalized, they can't avoid that.
True. So how did you deal with your identity in your thesis?
Well, for me, the decolonization work, or talking about decolonization, taught you directly, personally. Like, that notion of doing research from an objective Western perspective of objectivity, that you're disconnected with things, I think it doesn't, at least it doesn't match, or it's not aligned with decolonization, and therefore also touches you personally. And the decolonization or decolonial work starts from within you. True. And questioning your own histories, your own identities. Can you name your ancestors from where? Why not? Like, all of what languages I should be speaking, even if colonization didn't happen. Like, I would be speaking Mexicano, Nahuatl from the Huasteca Hidalguense from my mom's side, and Purépecha from my dad's side. But that's a journey that I have been consciously doing to reconnect and discover my indigenous roots, because I didn't know before. Like, so, and my different positionings as well. So, like, it's a journey. And I think decolonization is a journey that it will take time. And for me, I don't remember, someone asked me before, like, how would I think that it, like, let's say my research was good or successful or something like that. It's like, if in 10 years my research is obsolete because education system change, that would be great. Because that means things from within, and these conversations that we're having now are like, so old school. Because education and rethinking of design as a pluriverse of identities, a pluriverse of approaches, that are very context-based from the different communities and countries and diversities, that would be great. So I would love that my research become obsolete soon.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's very thought-provoking. So coming back to this this slide that you're showing, who is an artisanal design? And I can see that it's an intersection of indigenous artisans and hegemonic designer.
Yeah, in Latin America, there's this field called diseño artesanal, and actually there were a few universities and design programs in different countries. In Mexico, I think in Salvador, or I don't remember which countries, but they do have as a special thing, you know, like
Right.
diseño artesanal, and it's defined as this space when designers are, I call it, quote, hegemonic designers, when you are trying in this Western-centric and all this worldview, approach indigenous communities that have their own worldviews, ways of being and doing, and they focus way more on community rather than individual. So we're learning, I remember learning about diseño de autore, which is like from Italy, you know, like this, just signing your design, and it's very way more individual. But then we reach with this mindset to work with indigenous artisans, and it's still present, especially in textiles, with this notion of development or craft development. So, and actually India has a lot of that with designers meet artisans and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was Craft Revival Trust, I think, and also Colombia was involved. So we always have this notion of, as designer and artisan, as very different and very disconnected. And you have to have, and imagine like if you learn that what you design and your creations have your signature, and then you approach communities that you're working with their knowledge that is ancestral and that is intergenerational, and then you just work with them and then you sign your own collection. So this for me a strong disconnection. I think Colombia is doing a good job in for example, they have some sort of regulations that when designers work with artisans, they can't claim authorship. That was a few years that I heard. I'm not sure if that's current. But in Mexico, especially in textiles, yeah, like a lot of designers arrive to work with communities, and then the way I see it is like the knowledge of the backstrap loom weaving, for example, to do these garments is from them. So they know the techniques, and and the patterns that sometimes are taken are part of the indigenous people's rights. Right. But then because the designer arrived, and then they create their own collections and they sell it under their own names.
Yeah.
So there's a clash there. And actually there was one example particularly that made me shift. It was before, because I've been passionate about this topic like for decades.
Yeah.
And so before starting the PhD, I had to go back to Mexico for health issues for my family. So I went back, and because of, small community, I knew someone, like my father is a doctor, he knows someone, and blah, blah, blah. So I end up, I wanted to talk with this designer. I had the opportunity to talk with this French designer who works in a cooperative, and she's part of this cooperative. And so I was talking, I know that this cooperative had been for a long time, and I was kind of talking with her, approaching just to know a little bit more about the work they do. And it was very interesting. At that time, I couldn't understand and grasp it. It took me like a year or more to see why it felt uncomfortable at that time, or I couldn't make sense of this, because she said that they had two NGOs, one that was registered in France and part of the French designers, and then they have the local cooperative, another NGO. So the collections that were developed in using the indigenous knowledge of the weaving, the backstrap loom weaving, and the patterns from the textiles, they were registered by the French NGO. And then they give the rights to the indigenous communities to reproduce the designs. But then at that moment, something didn't make sense, but I couldn't grasp what was it. And until I was reading about decolonization, it's like, oh, it makes sense. Right. How can you register a design that is so attached to a community that belongs to someone else. And it's not, and you know, like there's always, it's not that they're bad intention people, it's just the way that design has been reproduced and taught. And because in France, design works differently. But then if you come to indigenous communities and all of that, and I know after doing more ground interviews and stuff, and I know that that case really, because that designer was brought by another NGO, and that create a lot of problems within the first NGO. And this first NGO that is still doing amazing work now, they stopped working with designers for decades, like for 10 years. Because like, why should we pay royalties for using the designs that are part of our community? You know, like there was a clash, very strong clash, and that was like 20 years ago, maybe. So this is a conversation that has been going on. And there have been changes, but still, I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, so the question that I have is, what is the role of an artisanal designer? Because there are two things that I can think of. One is the ownership, which lies in the community, and the second is the design itself, from the designer, or is it going to be the design of the artisans? So if a designer has to provide an impact to the community, what is his role in terms of the design?
For example, the role that describing this reading about this guide of for artisanal designers and stuff, of what do, they said that they need to know the market and have links in the market to know what the market needs and wants and all of that. So it's a very market-driven approach. But if you respond on the market's needs, a lot of what I've seen is that in ceramic happens as well, because of the Western taste of, and I think you will get me into this, like, because coming from India, like our countries are like full of color and patterns everywhere. Yeah. And then we learn design, that good design only use 2-3 colors. Yeah. And don't mix patterns because it's bad taste, and don't do this. Yeah. And then we're learning this, and then we look around us and it's not the reality. And things are gorgeous, are just gorgeous, and they are full of everything. As you were talking about minimalism and all of that, is like, it just doesn't make sense. And the patterns and of these garments and stuff, they have a meaning, and they have a reason why they are here, and they have a reason why they're designed. So they have a lot of meanings. But sometimes the designers come and it's like, oh no, let's take everything out and make it clean and put it in the center. Yeah. But then what's the meaning again? So what the reason why I work with in close collaboration with an independent collective called Malacate Taller Experimental Textil. They have been working as independent group for I think 10 years now, or even more. But and they work on Facebook, like they commercialize on Facebook. But there's not, and I learned so much from them. And actually, I say that this research is collective because without them, there wouldn't be any research. Right. And I was exploring with them their approach to design. So one of the chapters, or part of the thesis, is Malacate's approach to design, because they have their own ways of designing, respecting their own times and rhythms, because like weaving, it's part of life. It happens while harvesting, it happens while raising children and all of that. So it's not a factory that they go and work in. So it happens in their communities in the different rhythms. Also, they get, for example, Malacate have a few strategies, and I think I can show you a few pictures here further. Sure. They are Malacate, some of the members, and then, for example, they rescue patterns and techniques that sometimes, of course, because we think an indigenous cultures as being sometimes static in time, but no, they have evolved their garments in 30 years, like, and a tremendous rhythm. So if you see the textiles from 10 years into now and 20 years, they are so different because it's alive. The culture is alive. So it's being evolving. So learning how they approach design based and respecting their own autonomia, that, and I say autonomia in Spanish because it's not the same as autonomy in English, and it's not the same as sovereignty. So also that's another thing to understand, that sometimes translation become kind of limited.
Yeah.
So, and they talk about innovación como resistencia, innovations as resistance. So for them, preserving, rescuing, and keeping their ways of working, it's a way of innovation. Because if you've seen the pictures, like for example, this type of garment that was used exclusive by men in this community, and just one person, one family still know how to do the type of gathering and embroidery, those patterns.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a, you can see like kind of a blouse, but they don't use any type of Western ways of pattern and cutting. It's just gathering the fabric and embroidery. So this lady, this elder, she's teaching the other families, well, first her own family, her daughter, and I think even husband now, and they are kind of like reactivating these designs. And also another community, we can see Aguacatenango, they still rip the fabric with the hands rather than scissors, and they still measure with the body. So like the ways of resisting this thing of, like, it's more about re-educating consumers. Like if you want to buy, it's because you understand our ways of working and doing, instead of like, oh, I need this particular size and this particular, like, no, you can't do it in backstrom loom. So you have an approximate, but it's not just doing exactly like mass production, because it's not. They are artisanal pieces, so they have differences. So another picture of how they rescue from other type of cloths, like ceremonial tablecloth, and then from there they've been taking elements and now making huipiles with that for wearing. But those designs are generated by them, not by external designers. So that's why I wanted to work with them to know how they design from their own worldview.
Right. I think you should go through this presentation because it's fascinating.
No, it's very long, but I just
maybe, I mean, anything related to your research, because I feel it's a fascinating research. Especially you mentioned about the how you structured your research in such a way that it metaphorically represented Yoloville.
Yeah, Holoville. Let I go back to that part. Yeah. So even it was imagine being within academic systems of design that have very particular way of approaching design. So decolonizing design inside the system is kind of complicated. So it's a lot of and I'm very fortunate that I'm part of it's called My Chiaro Nui group. It's Maori and Indigenous postgraduate scholars from any field, but Maori and Indigenous scholars from around the world that we get together and support each other, because we're developing ways of doing research differently within our own communities. And my supervisor, Dr. Jenny Wilson, that I always be like so grateful for her, and she's also part of she's a coordinator. She said, like, we have to be brave and we have to support each other, because we will face this kind of, you have to be brave in order to do things the way that we need to do for our communities. That sometimes could be kind of complex.
Yeah,
so
resistance.
Yes. So at the end, these groups are very important as well, just to bounce this idea. That's why for me, inviting and sharing with anyone who wants to approach design from a different perspective, I'm kind of open and supportive, because I've been in that journey as well. So for example, the methodology at the end that was developed, it's called Holoville. But Holoville is backstrap loom weaving, is the way that these things are made. And I reached, let's say, I conceptualized as a methodology almost at the end, because I knew all the stuff, and I was trying to make sense from a Western perspective of this, and I just couldn't. I just couldn't. I couldn't find the right things in order to name stuff. But when I was talking with weavers, not only from Mexico, but even from here, anyone that was familiar with the language of the threads and weaving, like my supervisor, she also do Taniko weaving, which is Maori. And I told her that I've had the need to learn this again and like to learn this. And she said like, yeah, you have to. So there are things that I didn't need to explain to her because she knew, like once you go through your body with this knowledge, you will get it. Mm-hmm. So at the end, I thought that Holovil was a good way of structuring, because Holovil, the backstrap loom weaving that is so common in Mayan communities, but all Mesoamerica, and even in Philippines they are as well, and South America. It's a type of weaving that is called, it's backstrap loom because it's attached around the waist, and you can see here that is in the waist, and you saw the movement of Lucy, what she was doing. So this, just to conceptualize, using this as a metaphor of a cycle, like she has to lean forward her body in order to let this loose and change the direction of the threads, and then lean back in order to have the threads very tense. So, and this is something that it was taught by the goddess Ixchel based on Mayans. And we can find this in codex. And it's a knowledge that has been present in Mesoamerica for so long. And it has meanings, like it's not only the technique, but for example, for them, the symbolism of tying the top of the umbilical cord as umbilical cord to the tree, because normally they attach to trees. So it's like the connection with Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. And then the different parts of the loom is the head, the ribs, the heart, the feet. And you saw the movement of the weaver. It's the representation of birth and the contractions giving birth. Yeah. And doing this, you even when I finally kind of get an idea of how to do it, you get in a sort of a meditative state. So the benefits of textiles are way beyond the commercial. And I think the commercial is even the least that you can think of. But if we think about the communities that actually they make a living out of this, like Kilkush Lejal, which is the fair dignified life of the buen vivir from the communities, from Tzotzil and Central communities, it's part of who they are, and it's how can they make a living based on their own practice. So so that became a way for me to understand, because I'm very visual, so I needed to do diagrams in order to understand and make sense of my thoughts. Yeah. So backstrap loom or Holovil definitely helped me to conceptualize and theorize all these things, and using epistemologies onto epistemologies of the South. So for example, even visually, I use the language of the threads a lot, and just because textiles, I said, even not only help me for the research, but even rescue me personally again, and being in touch with the textiles again from a making perspective, which embroidery and stuff like that have been part of what I learned as a child, but I forgot because that's not design. And then how can I reclaim that and reframe it now from a different perspective? And I'm discovering as well that this is attached to my well-being as well. And in COVID times, like the amount of groups that have been doing all this type of work online, and groups and sharing tutorials, it's huge because it's so connected to our well-being. Right. So I had to, I was almost finishing the thesis. Yeah, it was the last revisions. And I remember a feedback of, because the structure of the thesis is not a traditional structure. And I was very concerned because we consciously, with my supervisors, we consciously discussed that we wanted to break that structure in order to work the best for the work. And in cycles, as we were talking, like the cycles of weaving. So I created this piece in order to make readers understand that it's the same as a research, like the necessary things for a PhD thesis are there. Like you have the introduction, lead review, research methodology, research design and methodology, results and finding, and discussion and conclusions are all there, but they're structured a little bit differently. So introduction, chapter 1 could be one section, and then we review here, but also, like methodology is entwined with results. Yeah. in a way, I use the visual and the language of the threads to try to make sense of my thinking and that transmit that to others. And so I used it. I knew that I wanted to use ethnography, and I used Sarah Spink approach because she talks about the visual, digital, and sensorial ethnography, and that was discovered through time and the different field trips. Because I was thinking more in timeline, like first trip, second trip, third trip, but then at the end I realized that they're all connected, but it was useful to make a distinction of every chapter to focus on a different thing. So like the visual or the digital, because they work in a digital space, and a lot of the ethical consumption and artisanal pieces are sold in digital platforms like Facebook and Instagram. So at the end, that became another focus. And then the sensorial ethnography, like my need to go and learning, like backstrap loom as well, going through that with my own body to understand these things, it became key. The senses, how to make things, understand things through the senses. And I put a GoPro in heart level. So I use the camera as the eyes of my heart, so they can visualize. And again, here I use, try to use ontoepistemologies of the South. So sentir pensar is translated, sentir is feel, pensar is think. And this comes from, well, it's known in academia for Orlando Fals Borda from Colombia, but he acknowledged this term from fishermen communities that he heard this term for the first time, that we think while we feel and we feel while we think. So sentir pensar is very well established already in Latin American scholars within academia. And then corazonar, which is corazón is heart, and corazonar is very attached into the Mayan worldview and language as well. So they said, when they asked in Tzotzil, ¿Cómo está tu corazón? Is how is your heart? That's how are you? So the importance of the heart, it's the central of Mayan worldview, and Mesoamerican as well, not only Mayan, like Yolotl in Nahuatl from Aztec. So it's like, like the heart has been so present in our culture for so long. And so corazonar also, it's a play of word in Spanish, because it's if you divide the word, reason. So to reason with the heart, but also collectively. So co-reasoning and embodiment. That's my second supervisor, he's a biologist, Chilean, with a Puche heritage biologist, that he talked about embodiment, and he showed me about embodiment. And when I understood that, it's like, it makes so much sense, because like you embodied the research. I embodied textiles, how they embody textiles in their way of being and doing. So it's like how this way of understanding through the senses and our whole beings are very important to knowledge creation and understanding.
Right. So like you mentioned about sentir pensar or buen vivir, which is like community well-being, if I'm not wrong. So how are these philosophies manifesting in your research, or in perhaps even the artisanal design?
Well, buen vivir as such, as a term, has been attached into Sumaca Usada and Sumaca Maña, which is, let's say, the buen vivir from the Andean regions, from Quechua and Aymara. And it also became part of the constitution from Ecuador and Bolivia and stuff. So in the Andes region, they talk a lot about buen vivir in South America. But then buen vivir as such, like if we think about what buen vivir means, not in Spanish, but like in different indigenous languages, then I was thinking, like, what is the buen vivir of the community that I'm working with? And so they talk about lekil kush lejal, that it's lekil is good and kush lejal is life. So how can we achieve a good living? But good living here, and again, the translations don't help a lot, but well-being, it's attached to, from the Western perspective, is not the same as buen vivir. So we talk about like collective well-being, that it's the individual, but always in relation. So relationality and be connected with the context and community and the environment is key. And so, and exploring and researching about how in Abya Yala, that's the name, indigenous name from American continent, from the Kuna people, or we talk in Nahuatl, we talk about Semanawak. In the different regions, in different countries, indigenous communities talk about different ways of buen vivir. So for example, in Yecnemilis is from Nahua people from the center of Mexico, and Panama, Guatemala. So we can see a lot of different ways of naming this philosophy of buen vivir, but it's manifested differently in each community. So we wanted to explore how Lequilcush Lejal is connected into the textiles. And it's key. Like for being a weaver, it's an identity, it's a way of being and doing. So it's connected to your well-being, because while doing it's a way of meditation as well. You know, like it's you enter and you connect with ancestry and you connect with nature. And for me, it was great. Like when you saw the picture the place that I was learning back from Handloom, my teacher Mari, she was teaching me. And so Mari was there, her mom was there, it was in her house, and I think her niece, my mom went with me that time. And while I was learning, I kind of stopped for a while, and I don't know if I could say that I have a brief taste of Lequilcush Lejal, because I could see, you know, like in the garden, they were growing the corn and food, and then you have animals there, like the chickens and families around. You're connected with nature, you're connected with your ancestry through what you're making, through knowledge. So it's just a little taste. So it's something that you pursued, a fair dignified life. And what they look by, let's say, trading the textiles is actually to achieve a fair dignified life. It's not about getting rich, it's just to have enough and to have access and dignity. So that's why it's fair dignified life, because the sense of self and respect to yourself and your community is important. So Halel, which is weaving, it's so expressed in everyday life, but also in the way they talk. So yeah, that's basically, we explore a lot of what is Lequilcush, what is Lequilcush Lejal for them, how do they feel, how does it taste. And so the co-design workshops that we're conducting with them, they were talking about the presence of the heart was very important. So they talk about work in community, work with the heart, that our work is valued, attached to identity. So we talk about Otan led, Otan is in Celtal, heart, which is attached to Lopez Incin, is a Mayan scholar from the region, an activist. So that's why I use Otan, because it was already established within the, let's say, the academia. But then even the heart is so present that in every region they talk about the heart with different words, like con, conton, because it's so present that it's in our languages and from a different region. So yeah, that's in a way what we try to explore. And actually from one trip to the other, I could see they created this piece that is how, and they embroidered that, how they Lequilcush Lejal manifest in their language or in their life. So they have food, they have weaving, you know, nature. So this piece was created by them. I was thinking, oh, maybe they can do something, and they did it by themselves. I didn't say anything, because that's a way of expression. And then we explore in different media as well, like, you know, like drawing, a lot of drawing, because they draw. They are so creative that because of the different languages, like the group that we work in one of the co-design sessions, they were they spoke Tzotzil and Celtal, 2 different languages. So there were 21 women, so we have to divide it into teams. And for me, it was not about me listening and how could you have to adapt, because I couldn't record that. there was no point, and I couldn't understand. And at the end, it's just letting them, giving them the space, the safe space and freedom to express in their own language.
Right.
While they were discussing in teams, and then they create some sort of like, you know, like posters and stuff that they can portrait, and also the camera. There's a instant camera, Instafilm, so they can take pictures real time instead of, because you can cut the patterns and paste it in a poster on a paper. So they will take pictures of garments of themselves and then just put it there, and together with drawings, with words. So just to have them, to give them the freedom so they can communicate with me
Right.
in a medium that they will feel comfortable. And also I was very blessed to be able to take my mom and my daughter with me. She learned how to do embroidery there in one of the trips, because it's part of the way they work together. So it's instead of me as an external reaching, oh, this is the way we're working, it's just like, I'm just here and share, you can share whatever you want with me, you know. And
Yeah.
my daughter, yeah, like she was there she was 6 at the time. And then I could see the dynamic of like one starting to draw and the other one, do you want to learn? And the other one was teaching her. My mom was helping with some thread. So it's I think it's another way of doing research that is actually more aligned with me, and my mom's still in touch with them and I'm still in touch with them.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, what was your final result of this whole PhD research and thesis?
uh One of the proposals that we kind of came into, I tried to make sense of the things that we can transmit to other people. It was, I don't know if I have it there, but yeah, exploring the meanings and the worldview within the patterns as well. But the proposal was to do a buen vivir centric design, and was playing a little bit of, you know, like human-centered design, user-centered design. We talk about all these things. So it's like we were exploring how a buen vivir centric design would look like. What are the principles, or what are the things that we can, if we talk about buen vivir as the focus of the work, how would this manifest?
Right.
So we start exploring different ways of combining with Maya, the cosmovision Maya, ways of being and doing, and connecting the three realms. For example, from this pattern, you can see it has a lot of meaning. So is the world, the cardinal points, and then from the center, which is the seed, it grows the sacred tree that connects the world of the underworld, the world of the deceased, with the world of the living in the trunk, and the world of the gods on top. So from these principles of this idea of cycle, and using Zapatista principles as well, like exploring how the heart and buen vivir or legiscus legal is connected in the context in different ways. So we as designers or researchers or whatever, we need to go down, because we come from a place of hierarchy already. So we need to go down and be humble and let them do the talking, not rather than us imposing. And then let the speck or the seed just to flourish and to go into the light, and to understand that holobil is resistance as well. You know, like just keeping preserving the practice is still an act of resistance in a capitalist world, with capitalism that just want you to mass produce, and the meaning behind the stuff are gone, and it's not important. So they operate respecting their own worldview and autonomia. So that's why they operate in a different way. So this is one of the proposals at the end, and I said in the thesis, in the closing, that this is just a seed that is intended to be planted in different soils. So buen vivir will manifest differently in Mapuche communities in Chile, for example, or with Maori here. Right. So it's just like guiding principles, but actually need to be developed side by side and by communities in different, like very context-based. So this model, it's very attached to Meluch, the symbol that is a worldview. And it's just guiding principles on understanding that buen vivir, and I try to represent like with the same language of the threads, you know, like in a textile, if you pull one thread, you can see
everything.
how the whole thing start deforming. So that was the idea with this model.
Nice.
So at the end, we have uno con el todo, one with the whole. So it's a harmonic coexistence of the earth, or we call it Tonantzin, the Mother Earth, or here they call it Papatuanuku. And then Pachamama in South America. So we need to have a harmonious coexistence with earth, beings. And here I could talk about being not only human beings, but the trees, the stones, the mountains, the lakes, they all have this divine energy. So that's why we talk about beings in general, and nature culture, because in indigenous worldviews, there's no disconnection between nature and culture. It's just aligned.
True.
And then from the other side, we have colectividad. And I play a lot with language here. You will see like Spanish, English, because there are things that cannot be translated.
True.
And so I put autonomía from a Latin American perspective. Reciprocity, that's something so present in indigenous communities everywhere. Complementaridad, like to complement things. So because in my worldview, even the deity is not female or male. There's always cycle. When there is death, there is life. When there is feminine, there's the masculine. They're not opposed. They are complementing each other. So the same happens here. Like we need to understand that we complement each other. And here, instead of support, I talk about mutual care. And care is related to the heart, because it's not as, the distinction between charity, you know, like, because sometimes when we talk about charity, it's just like my handouts. But mutual care is because I care about you deeply from the heart. So I want to be like solidarity with you. So it's a little bit different of support based on charity. Right. And then we have the other side, resource. I call it resourceful, and I put a quote and I break the word, because resourcefulness is also another theory that is already developed that I didn't explore actually. But it's because sometimes we say in let's say global northern countries, is like, if you don't have funding, then you don't do. But in countries like us, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like you do what you have with what you do, what you can with what you have, because life goes on, and you can sit down and wait that someone else give you and solve you. So that's why, So that's why it's resourceful, full of resources, whatever you have in. And then, for example, Malacate also operates in other economies, social and solidarity economic, rather than under the logic of the capital. And one of the conclusions for me in the research is like, they can't be ethical consumption under the logic of the capital. Mm-hmm. Also, it's around ethics and dignity. Like dignity is something that even in charity, sometimes in charity models, dignity is something that we don't, when I see this,
slope.
Like these campaigns are using the poor people, you know, like it's a marketing strategy. Where's the dignity of the person? You know, like so we need to be very careful as well. And then pluriversal, which is, many worlds, como like Zapatistas say, un mundo donde quepan todos los mundos, a world with many worlds can fit. So understanding the pluriversal nature, not universal nature of everything. Right. And then different dimensions, understanding that our cultures believe in other ways of being that is not only tangible, but the deities, the spirits, vibes. We talk about las vibras, las malas vibras, y las buenas vibras. There's beliefs that are embedded in who we are. And even and I know that sometimes in academia, these things are rejected, like spirituality and all of that, but it's part of who we are. And why can't we just break with it? And I clarify, I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about spirituality, which is a little different thing. Yeah. And then also understand the paradox that exists within worlds. And also the last one is the equilibrium, you know, like understand that everything is in constant movement and change. So equilibrium is dynamic, and it comes in times and cycles. And sometimes we are in darkness, but sometimes we reach understanding and we reach a little bit of light. So even if within my own research, I was in this constant space of sometimes not knowing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
but then trusting that things will come up and letting the data, and I don't call data, but letting the research or letting the things emerge by themselves and then try to make sense of them, and always consulting and always align with mis compañeras.
So this whole structure that you have come up with, so it's like a grounding theory. If someone has to, let's say, or a designer wants to come into the community and would like to look at the whole the design of the textiles and the design and the community itself. And after understanding, probably the designer can come up with new designs. Is that how you want to proceed, or is it
No.
just that it's just the understanding of the whole community?
Well, here that's the kind of principles, but because at the end I realized that in order to, like, indigenous communities are not the ones who need to be decolonized, are the designers. We as designers need to be decolonized if we want to go to work with communities. Otherwise, we will be colonizing again.
Right.
So there are more principles to us to understand and there's a lot of reflexivity that comes with it, like understanding that's why I call about the 3PA, the power, privilege, politics, and access. These conversations need to be in the table, even though they are uncomfortable. But if we really want to change the context, we really need to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. And I don't have it in the presentation, but here in the thesis, in the last chapters, there are like 11 points that are kind of recommendations of how a buen vivir design, centric design could manifest. So they are not, how can I say, like, they are not necessarily, you check boxes or tick boxes, like done. Yeah. But they are kind of ways of thinking. Like there are 11 steps that I have here. Like, for example, creativity as a right. Like artisans to be creative, not only makers, because sometimes they're creative by nature. They do amazing stuff, and we come just to tell them what to do, and that's not. So creativity as a right. And then the acknowledgement of design, like process, patterns, and techniques that are part of the indigenous rights of the communities we work with. So all of these things, we need to understand that belongs to their own communities, and they're part of the rights. And that's recognized by UNESCO, like in Article 11 and 31. And then another one, it's the trade or brand name not under the designer's names, indigenous or non-indigenous, because I've seen, like in global northern countries like here or in Canada and other places, that yes, they are indigenous designers, but still benefit mostly the individual rather than the collective, and they still operate on the capitalism and stuff. So that's why for us it was important to clarify that the collective should be there, and the naming as well, because it's not only you, it's your community. And then, for example, horizontality and non-hierarchy, like, so artisans to be considered as designers and artists at the same level as Western or global northern educated designers. Like, their knowledge is as valuable as the one that I'm bringing. It's not less.
True.
Personal relationships, face-to-face, long-term relationships, not only like I do a project and then I'm gone, because to develop trust and personal relationship takes time. Like operating maybe as a autonomous collective, that they don't depend on government funding sometimes, because that comes with a cost. And sometimes this funding they have expectations. Working together in long-term respectful projects. Indigenous knowledge and principles at the center to rescue and revival of techniques and community-based innovation. So understand that they already innovate, and the indigenous knowledge should be the main, not the market needs. Informing and educating consumers about context, processes with transparency. So who are the communities, who are the makers, what are the techniques, how many hours it takes, like, it's not, it's not an object or a product, but it's related to another, a lot of knowledge behind. And so we need to know about these things.
Right.
Using original names, for example, Huipil. Huipil is the name, or this is called Mocheval, or Huipil, this is the right name, because there are brands that go to Mexico and buy a lot of garments and they sell it overseas and they call it kaftan instead of Huipil. But then if you honor and you say that you love the culture of Mexico and you're making a living out of it, why don't you honor the names that we use rather than using another? It's colonizing, and you're using another. The kaftan is from a different context,
Right.
and they already took the word and use it without context.
Yeah.
And operate under alternative economics such as social and solidarity economy. So it's more a series of recommendations and stuff that in order to actually do buen vivir centric design, we need to do this type of collaboration. So it's not like expectation, more like designers doing what to do, but to work alongside. And actually my questioning is, do they need designers to tell them how to design? Based on my experience with Malacate, they don't.
That is true. However, I think we are running out of time. But one last question is, again, I'm going to play devil's advocate. The thing is, for example, COVID-19. Because of that, you don't have market demand for the products. For many artisans are going bankrupt, and even craftsmen are going bankrupt. So I feel at these points of time, at least a designer can, let's say, helps them out in probably doing, for example, making masks instead of.
I can show you the amount of masks that they have emerged in Mexico, like from artisanal communities. So many. They are happening, and they are doing it by themselves.
Yeah. So you don't need a designer per se now.
They are designers already. We just don't name it that way, but they are designers already. And you can find different, I'm impressed, and I would love to be there to get on a lot of masks, because like each community are creating face masks based on the patterns from their own communities. So you can get masks from Tzotzil and Celtal communities from Chiapas, or from Cadenilla from Oaxaca, from El Istmo. So the patterns are very different depending on the region, and there's already happening. And I don't know if they actually use a designer for that. So it's just acknowledging them. They are designers.
Yeah, that's true. I think I remember just now one of the stories where even in India, one of the artisans, I don't remember in which area he was an artisan, but the fact is that he posted on Facebook stating that, I'm sorry, I'm going bankrupt. So here's a design of a mask that I'm doing. If you please want to contribute and buy this, that would be really helpful for me. And that post just went viral. And every single day he was having 300 to 400 calls, and orders. So I think, and as you mentioned, it's true that they are designers themselves, and they know what they can do in times of distress. And probably you can say that desperate times call for desperate measures. So they end up doing different things as the need requires.
It's like that's how we have been operated for centuries before modernity. That's the way what we have been doing. So I will rethink even the term design or designer, like who's a designer, because of course there are indigenous designers that are educated on their hegemonic design as well, and reproducing that and having the same individual mindset or market-driven mindset. So I think for me that will be a risk, It's not only about you identifying as indigenous or not. It's more about operating and in different ways that are not complicit with patriarchy, with capitalism, with modernity, and all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was thought-provoking and very insightful. I think we should give this an end. And it was, and I believe, and I mean, I really loved having you here on my podcast and getting to know so much about your thesis, your research, the philosophy that the community employs, and it's fascinating for me, and thought-provoking and insightful, as I mentioned earlier. So
thank you.
we will have to end this now. And to my fellow folks listening in, I've shared the link down below to Diana's thesis on Bon Vivre, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, centric design model. So it is just tip of the iceberg of what she has done. I mean, what we've spoken today. So what she has done is a lot more, and it's phenomenal. And I would recommend you to read her thesis. So it's down there in the link. And I'll see you next time with more such experts on my show. Until then, namaskara. Insert outro music.